I'm Kurt Hauswirth with Public Radio 90 WNMU-FM, and this is the Local Spin. I'm pleased to welcome Marty Gray, who has Marquette connections here, but currently resides in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And Marty, it's great to have you here on the Local Spin. Welcome.
It is awesome to be on. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So now we started chatting on Instagram, I think, back in like March of this year. You reached out to me that you had some new music on the horizon coming out. And now, while you're currently in Ann Arbor, you also mentioned that you grew up in Marquette. You have lots of experience here from going to Marquette Senior High School, studying music here, but you also studied opera down at U of M down there. But also you have experience as a punk drummer. So I'm just kind of setting the stage for your musical history and your Marquette history here. But I want to get talking about some of your new music. But first, I wanted to ask you kind of what got you started in making your own music, and how does that relate to being a musician in Michigan?
Yeah, so you set the stage pretty well there.
Good.
My whole upbringing was sort of just like a confused, disorganized scramble of music, right? My parents wanted me to do musicals, and so I did that. My parents forced me to do some sort of music class in school, so I did band. I played the saxophone, and then did choir in high school. Never really knew what I was doing, but they always encouraged me to go really hard and to try to make things happen in whatever I did, right? And so eventually that turned into going to school for opera for whatever reason, and knowing that I wasn't going to do opera as a career, but still wanting to like be in a music scene somewhere,
Mhm.
so there's always this like ambiguous sense of, well, I got to do music, but I don't know what, you know?
Mhm.
So my whole life has just been that ambiguous feeling morphing in different ways until I happened upon Ableton, which is a program for recording music and making it. Right. And so that was perfect for me because I could take out all of my weird need to make something onto one program. Right. And so then I started making my own music in college as sort of an escape from, you know, classical academia.
Sure.
And that was nice. And that resulted in my first album, which came out in 2017. And if you listen to it, you get the sense that it's a very disorganized, confused, but still very enthusiastic attempt to like get away from reading. you know?
Gotcha. Yeah.
So over the years that morphs and changes until now I'm 4 years out of school, working in a recording studio, doing this production thing full time, being a musician, and still confused, but in a very different way.
Right. Confused, but you've got a little more bearing towards maybe where you want to go with with your life and with music and everything, right?
Yeah, this appearance of direction that I have, this
The
this
illusion of
this
direction.
this facade, I've gotten very good at convincing others that I know what I'm doing.
Well, yeah, convincing others is half the battle. So, but convincing yourself at the same time, it sounds like you're finding yourself with different experimentation and maybe learning some rules along the way and then making some of them up as you go. I mean, I was in the music department here at Northern Michigan University as well, and taught music for a while, but now here I am doing, public radio stuff with a little music on the side. So it seems like we all kind of find our own way, and we might learn a few things officially and then learn things unofficially. So good to hear about your musical past and how it's got you to this point so far. But along with that, you also are a Michigan musician, whether that's a quote unquote or not. But you say a lot of your music is influenced by experiences in Michigan, and particularly in growing up in Marquette, with some of your songs written while you're in the UP as well. So how does that affect how you write music? And like maybe is that focused more on some of your past material, or is that also kind of looking forward to your newest endeavors?
Both. I mean, as an artist, you can't help but be sculpted by what's around you, right? So it'd be impossible not to be a Michigan musician while growing up here and living here, and spending so much time here. But I think specifically growing up in Marquette and visiting Marquette, having been around the United States, it's comparatively an incredibly inspiring place to write because it's got so many different kinds of people and it's such a unique space. So I've always found it really easy to draw inspiration and find stories in Marquette. Specifically, the newest album of mine is based on an encounter I had in Marquette at a bar in Flanigan's.
Okay. Down at Flanny's. Okay.
Right, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. But it's just like things happen in Marquette, incredible things with incredible people. Some really intense, some just really interesting. It's just it's a very bustling place.
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. Well, and it's always great to have those Marquette experiences, whether they are the intense ones or if they're maybe a little more on the relaxing side if you're down by the lake. But
Mm.
we want to talk about your album a bit. You've been hard at work on a new album of original songs. And from giving it a spin, you've got, it sounds like a lot of different genres plus different vocal styles that you're in there. It's a pretty adventurous album in some ways, and we also want to share some of your performance videos too from your recording space there. But with that, it's new music, and it's during a time where we've all been going through a lot, right, with a pandemic and social unrest and all kinds of things. Has this last year plus has that been like a pretty inspiring time for you? Or did you have like a lull period? How has it been for you creatively and I guess personally too over the last year?
That's a great question. I, when this all started to happen, I think I took a real cue from Jacob Collier, who very, very early on was really adamant in saying, for creative folk, you're gonna be tempted to shut down and you're gonna be tempted to be sad because it's gonna suck. Um, but he encouraged creatives to find a moment of quiet. And I think that's sort of how I went about it. I knew that my work wasn't going to happen. Like I wasn't going to be going to the studio anymore. Definitely not seeing people face to face. So production wasn't really gonna go. And so I was left with very little to do. And so taking that moment of quiet and reflection was super important. And I found that incredibly productive for whatever reason, you know. But it was a year of incredible meditation, which is something we're not due in 2020. In modern times, it's very hard to find quiet. It's very hard to find space. And
Yeah.
so, you know, a little bit of a silver lining there. And I was fortunate enough to be completely fine to have that space. That's a privilege that I recognize not everyone is afforded. But yeah, I found it incredibly productive, incredibly unique.
Good. And were the songs that you wrote on this album, were they developed over the period of that time, or did you have some maybe some skeletons of some songs from the past that you fleshed out over the period of time? Like, when did most of the creative period for this album come about for you?
All in 2020. It all started to happen after March of 2020.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
and it sort of came about because I have this little note in my phone of things that are inspiring that should be songs, like things that happen to you. Um, and this was just very natural, you know.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, for the first time ever, I think I really had like the time and the space and the quiet to like focus really hard on one story and one thing that happened to me.
Gotcha. So yeah, so the album here, and can you give me the name of the album here as well? It's escaping me at the moment.
Yeah, it's called The Regular.
The Regular. Okay.
Mhm.
And now this is a narrative, right? Because this you're saying this is about like one story with multiple parts then.
Yeah, so the whole like idea behind this album is that years ago, maybe like 2 years ago, I was back in my hometown visiting my parents and with a couple of high school friends out at Flanigan's. Now, if you don't know anything about Flanigan's, it is a Marquette staple, right? Right on
Right on
Washington,
Washington Street. Yep.
Washington.
Yeah.
And as a kid, you'd always see this bar, and my parents went there. my dad went to college at NMU, and so he's familiar with Flanigan's because it's been around forever. So it's this kind of legendary place that I never got to go into because I was below 18. So visiting my hometown after college with high school friends, we're like, let's go to Flanigan's. We've never been.
This is the moment. This is the
This
time
was
we
the
get to
moment.
go.
So we go into Flanigan's, and it's like a Wednesday night. There's no, there may be like 4 people there, and they're doing karaoke, right? They're doing
Oh yeah,
like the
that's a
sad.
tradition at Flanny's. You gotta get at least one experience on stage doing some karaoke there.
Yeah. So it's like it was like the saddest, most destitute karaoke I've ever been to. It was hilarious. There's like 4 people, like the dude running karaoke was just like not having a great time. He's looking at his watch. And then the 3 of us walk in, me, going to school for opera, the 2 other people going to school for musical theater. And we just start like ripping these Beyonce songs, right? Everyone's not thrilled. It is not.
Not the scene they were looking for.
No, we're not reading the room, right? They're like, who are you guys? And so, in between, hearing my friends sing and me singing, I go up to get a drink and start chatting with this dude who's sitting at the bar, and we start chatting. He asks me, I think, like one question, like, are you from here? I'm like, no, I live in Ann Arbor. He's like, oh, cool. And then he goes on, not even, not joking, like a 30-minute description of all of the things that are wrong in his life, where he's at.
Oh boy.
Just like unloading this guy says he's like 4, 5, 6 drinks in, so he's like no inhibition left.
Right. Yeah, empty this whole bucket out for you right now.
Oh yeah, and I mean maybe he knows that I'm not from town and like won't ever see him again, right? So I'm not sure, but he, for whatever reason, felt that it was the time to just like tell me everything about his life.
Mhm.
So he takes me through it. He takes me through like, being in a frat at NMU and how fun that was, and like going on a college trip to Singapore during the summer of like junior year, and like telling me how he didn't learn anything and how he wishes he could go back and do it again. He goes into his ex-fiance and like how that went wrong, and how he's single
Wow.
now and like working at the power plant. He was like a security guard for the power plant, right? And how like incredibly boring that was, and just like this general feeling of how his life was just kind of backed into a corner. And he like unloads all of this 25 to 30 minutes, downs his drink, pays, and leaves. And he has a cigarette outside, and he like is looking up at the moon the whole time,
Mhm.
and then just leaves. Right. And so I wasn't really ready for that night.
Sure.
It
Yeah.
was just one
One
of
night
those.
out and all of a sudden.
Yeah, exactly. It was just one of those experiences that you're just like, this should have been annoying, but it left me with just a sense of life's weight,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
the way this guy, I mean, the whole record is my like pathetic attempt at capturing his vibe, because his vibe was very specific.
Hmm.
Like he wasn't freaking out. He wasn't like overly confident about all of this. He was pretty matter of fact, and he was I mean, both him and I sort of, without speaking, agreed that I was going to be the wall to throw all of this stuff at,
Sure.
and it was amicable and it was fine. And near the end of it, I started to get this sense that he as a person had just gotten really bad luck, and all of these things were happening to him and he was blaming himself, but there was something in him that was trying to fight, right? And so it was almost as if I had caught him at this perfect moment in his life when he had this choice whether to like just lie down and die or change and do something really radical, which is kind of the vibe I got. Like he was saying, I'm gonna move somewhere crazy and start doing something nuts and like go off the grid. And
Yeah.
You know,
Huge
he's
life change or something.
right. Whether that was real or not didn't really matter. It's just such a human moment where him vocalizing it almost made it more real for him that
Hmm.
he was going to have to do something to make a radical change, to do a 180,
Yeah.
you know?
And so you were the one who got to catch all of that at that moment amongst an evening of, lighthearted karaoke, fun times, totally probably changed your vibe for a little while, but at the
Yeah.
same time, it sounds like you were able to absorb that story and then kind of maybe carry that vibe elsewhere and turn it into something for yourself with this album. So, my next question was kind of a description about how I felt listening to it, talking about like a feeling of buoyancy, like you're floating on waves, because it does have, it doesn't feel like the kind of vibe that might feel like oppressive or like you're carrying a bunch of weight of the world. So when you captured that story in your brain after all that, how did you decide which direction to go with your own music then, and like kind of take that story or take that vibe and repurpose it that way?
Oh, I think I lost you during the end there. I lost you at take that story.
Oh yeah.
Sorry.
So that's all right. That's all right. Zoom is always funny like that. But yeah, taking the story that you heard and like, how did you decide how to like develop that into your own story through your music and kind of maybe repurpose the vibes that you were that you were dumped on?
Yeah. Well, I think I had spent so long making music from my own point of view, and it always felt a little pretentious and self-absorbed, you know, which is there's something, you know, there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but I think with the pandemic I really wanted to explore someone else's point of view, right?
Mhm.
Which still somehow seems pretentious. I don't know. You know, but regardless, um I wanted to create music that had the vibes that I felt that person felt towards their story. Right? So I didn't want it to be me reacting to this story. I wanted to actually capture this person in a vacuum without, you know, without whatever preconceptions that I was feeling. Right? So if this album was from my point of view, it would have been a really sad album. You know, it would have been a bummer. But it wasn't, I didn't want to do that. I wanted it to be this person's story, this person's album. And by the way, I never got his name. I have no idea who he is.
Well, and
I have no idea.
you can't check up on him and see how his new life is doing.
I
So
literally can't.
that's a bummer.
And I
But
wonder what
that
he would say if he knew like a some 20-year-old idiot spent a year like writing an album about his story. He'd probably be like, why?
I wrote you a
That's really
concept album
that's
all
really
for you.
creepy. That's so weird.
But
But
inspiration can strike at the weirdest places, and especially in that kind of situation when you have someone basically unfolding their whole life and maybe all of their flaws for you and being so real in that moment, it might be a little alcohol induced, but at the same time there's probably a lot of truth behind the really heaviness that that person has felt. There's a lot of inspiration that can be taken out of that. Like you said yourself, it's kind of a maybe a universal feeling for a lot of us, especially during a pandemic, when we feel like maybe we've taken some wrong turns and we need to turn things around.
yeah, really well said. Super well said.
Well, so
Yeah,
with
I,
this, you've used lots of different instrumentation to reflect that, and like I said, it does have this feeling of buoyancy and like I mean, for lack of a better term, it's a very 2020 or 2021 kind of term. It's vibey. It's got a great
mm,
vibe. Like, but it also has like a fairly consistent vibe in that like you get that feeling like the tracks are connected together as you're telling this story. So how did you decide on like the techniques for production, along with some of the vocal styles? Like, did you decide to like explore your own vocals? Did you take inspiration from other artists for any of those kind of styles? Like, how did all those different stylistic points come together for the album?
yeah, that's a question I have difficulty answering because it's less conscious than you think. You know, like me me choosing instruments and choosing production styles, I really think is a weird subconscious, like it's this subconscious river that just comes from whatever I'm listening to or whatever I like in that moment, right? And so, I mean, for example, the Asian sounding, the Eastern quote unquote sounding string instrument that you hear throughout the record
Mhm.
is actually a lyre, like a zither, like a little lap harp
Oh
thing
yeah, it's
that
like that
my
big or so.
yeah, I'll show you. I'm not sure if this is. I mean, this is on radio, so it doesn't necessarily translate, but it's this.
Yeah, there we go.
You know, it's just like a little 14 string lap harp that you can bend on this. There's this little bridge here that separates the strings,
Hmm.
and if you push down on this part of the string, it bends the pitch, right? So
Hmm.
difference between that and this.
Oh yeah, there it is.
So it's actually an incredibly American instrument that just, sounds Eastern. But
Sure.
I got that instrument for Christmas in 2020. So
Nice.
I like put it everywhere, right? It's like it's that stupid. It's like, ooh, this sounds cool. Let me throw it in.
But it sounds like you have kind of a playful way to combine sounds too, which, is always a good thing, rather than saying, okay, this is how we're going to scaffold this song with this particular instrumentation. Like, it sounds like you don't have necessarily too rigid of a consideration when it comes to putting together sounds, as long as it sounds good to you, right?
Yeah, not really. I think like subconsciously artists like Tame Impala in the 1975 sort of come out a little bit, especially vocally. Um,
Sure.
but that's just because I've been listening to a lot of those two groups, those two people.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's a natural instinct for a lot of musicians, I feel, is whatever they kind of listen to a lot, something might come through by osmosis, and that's okay. But let's talk about the space that you're in too, because as we're talking about other kinds of musicians too, whether before the pandemic, if people kind of explored their own, like making their own musical space at home, or especially during the pandemic, a lot of people wanted to get into doing live streaming or figuring out how to feng shui their home just right. Tell us about your musical space, and what makes it a good place of creativity for you. You did mention that if you spend too much time, in a smaller space or any space, then it might not necessarily feel as creative.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, so this space, that the space that I'm in right now, is my quote unquote home studio, right? Which is weird to say because in college, the home studio was just a laptop and my little Focusrite, the red box, and then
Yeah.
a microphone, and then you acquire a guitar and you acquire a power strip and you acquire another mic and then you need a mic stand, and over the years you just sort of like
Gear
acquire
acquisition
things.
syndrome.
Yeah, things fall into your life, right? And so then you need a space to put all of it, and all of a sudden you're using all of that stuff and you need a space to be. And so, like everything in my life, this space morphed and grew like a weed. and and now it's here. But it's wonderful. Like, it's been really fun, especially moving into this new apartment in Ann Arbor. This is the first time I've actually had my own room to make stuff in,
Mm,
you
mhm.
know? Um, Previously, it's always been, a section of the living room or like a shared house in a college, in a college setting.
Oh yeah,
Um, but this is the first time I've had like my own enclosed space. So that's like super different.
yeah.
Um,
I'm sure that's a good feeling to have that your own kind of ownership over a space to really like spread things out or put things, the way you like them. So that's good to hear you've got your own space there too.
yeah, it's lovely. It's
Um,
great.
and our listeners and viewers will be able to see a couple of videos that you've shared with us too, of performances of a couple of tracks from this new album. One of which is called Glory Days, and one is called Falling in Blue. And we'll share that after our conversation. But can you tell us why you shared those two songs from the album?
Yeah, I feel like those two songs have the most potential to be popular or something. I don't know. There's this weird, as a musician, there's this weird pressure to always promote your like your best work,
Yep.
you know.
These
But
are my
also,
babies.
oh yeah, that's how it be. But you know, those two songs are also really fun to play and really fun to sing. Glory Days being, you know, the clear winner. But Glory Days was also sort of a really fun vibe that I got from this guy. You know, his story about him being in a fraternity at NMU back in the day.
Mhm.
Um, and he just recalled those memories with such fondness. And he said it was so fun, like so awesome, like, you know, drinking all the time, meeting a bunch of girls all the time. Like, always thought that would last for so much longer than it did. Like, I wish I could go back, you
Mhm.
know.
Mhm.
And it just seemed like in his life at that current moment, he was using those memories to draw happiness, you know? And
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
the song naturally came out really fun.
Yeah.
Compare that with Falling in Blue. Falling in Blue comes at the end of the record, and it's about the moment that he stepped outside to have a cigarette. He was smoking, like looking at the moon. So I sort of imagined him like almost finishing his conversation he was having with me with the moon.
Oh, okay.
Right? Maybe like unloading some of his more personal stuff that he wasn't even willing to share with a random stranger to some sort of like physical figure. Right? And
Mhm.
that seemed hopeful for some reason. It may be the most, you know, factually disingenuous part of the album because I wasn't actually there for that conversation that you know, that I perceived to have happened. But he's there, right? He's looking at the moon, like honestly, probably reflecting because he just unloaded his whole life to me.
Mhm.
And so that song ended up being really hopeful and
Yeah.
sort of like relieving almost.
Sure. Yeah. And as you're describing these two and like thinking about how the narrative of the album flows, it's almost like you're kind of the witness to this story that might be a little larger than you in that moment, but the story continues even though it's not being told to you. As you get towards the end of the album, then you get to Falling in Blue, where you've got more of the world to consider at that point, especially after you've gone through telling the story and all of the all of the garbage this person has told you so far. So
Uh-huh.
it's an interesting way to capture a story on an album where it's, you know, it's kind of a conversation, although it's a one-way conversation for a while, and then the conversation continues without the witness, but you still get to kind of see and just kind of guess what's happening. So that sounds like a really good exercise for a songwriter too, to think of it that way.
Yeah, it's frustrating. It's frustrating as hell because you don't know. He drives off, right? He just drives away. You don't know his. I didn't know his name. I honestly can't really even remember what he looks like. I know he had like thin, like sandy blonde hair and some stubble, and that was it. I
And
had
by
such.
now
I thought.
he maybe changed his name and his hairstyle completely with his new life. We never know.
I know.
But that might be the
It's so
beauty in it
frustrating.
too. You know, it could be that like mythical figure that's like, well, yeah, I need to relive some glory days, but at the same time, I got to make some changes. And I think, as we've said, that might be one of the most universal things that we've all been feeling, especially in the last year, is that, yeah, we're trying to think of the good times. But as we think of good times, they tend to run out, and then we have some bad times, and then we got to do something about it. So, you know, hearing about this story as the album goes on and hearing a little more behind it, yeah, that sounds like a really universal story to tell.
Yeah, I think you're right. There was something so incredibly human about the way that he was just being that night, you know? There's
Yeah,
something that happens to people when their backs are against the wall. That's just how it is. And a lot of people's backs were against the wall this past year. And
yeah,
it just made a lot of sense to try to explore it. And the record, like I had to make the record because I myself was trying to grasp that very like human part of who we all are, you know?
yeah, yeah. Well, kudos to you for wading through, you know, a very difficult time trying to pull out something universal for the rest of us to enjoy, and maybe think about some of those hard moments for ourselves too. And speaking of continuing to tell that story, do you have plans coming up? I mean, I know it's still kind of a questionable time in different places for performances, all that kind of thing, but do you have plans for either in-person performances or maybe virtual performances coming up?
Yeah, so I'm looking at getting back on stage. Really, really want to do that. And before the pandemic, I was performing with 4 people, sort of like a combination of live music and backing track stuff. Going forward, I'm just doing a one-man show. So it's just going to be like the videos you're about to see, right, on stage. So I'm going to try and make that work. We'll see if it is engaging or not. Well, we'll see. We'll see if people respond well. So I have that going on. I trying to get better at posting on Instagram and TikTok a ton. So check my TikTok and Instagram out. Marty Gray Music for both. Starting to focus a lot more on my own music. For a long time I was working as a producer, again, as like a songwriter, producer, musician, or, audio engineer type person, running around and doing a bunch of music for other people. And now that the pandemic is coming to a close, I am lucky enough to find a space to like focus on my own music a ton. So we'll see how legit we get.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, that's another thing too. People have really maybe made those decisions during a time of a lot of solitude and feeling like, well, I can't do this now, so I need to really find something where I find my bliss or really follow some passions. So good to hear that you're able to do that, and you've come to a point where you've got some new material to also do that with. Just a reminder, we're speaking with Marty Gray here on the Local Spin. He's our guest down in Ann Arbor, Michigan, but he has lots of history and experience in Marquette, especially at Flanigan's karaoke. At least
that one
time. Yeah. But I can also see the Youper sign behind you as well. So you've got your Youper connection here as well. So that's wonderful. You did mention that you are on Instagram and TikTok, Marty Gray Music. How else can people get connected with you and your music? I know you've got music on Spotify too.
Yes, sir. Spotify, Apple Music. I don't know if you're a weirdo and you listen to Amazon or like Google Play, I'm on there too.
All the platforms.
Yeah, all the platforms. However you listen to music, besides a CD player. I'm there.
Yeah, we need those cassette tapes. Where are they now? Yeah, exactly. And we will cut to a couple of performances here from Marty Gray in a little bit here with a couple songs from the album. We'll hear Glory Days and Falling in Blue that he helped kind of walk us through a bit. But as we wrap up, are there any other details that you want to share with our listeners and viewers today?
No, I don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah.
Listen to the record.
Go listen to the record. Yep, find him on the socials, and also enjoy performances of Glory Days and Falling in Blue here on the Local Spin.
Thank you so much. Bungled the bass. Bungled the bass lick.
Clemency from Saturday debauchery, crimson cherry plastic cups and blueberry lips, roll the halls of milk and honey, bountiful as parents' money. Life's lemons have never tasted quite the same, quite the same, quite the same. Simple love, heat it up. You're not worried if blazing new. Glory days, glory days. Pour enough, drink it up. Great pursuit to be raised. could pick. Party favors came in quantities and many different flavors. Take the mango with the lime. Use the fruit, discard the rind. Make the ripeness last forever, forever and ever and ever. Simple love, heat it up. You're the word and blazing blue. Glory days, glory days. Pour enough, drink it up. Great pursuit of the blazing. Oh, glory days, glory days. Don't it take a big toll? 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 Take a big toll. Simple love, heat it up. Young and worried and blazing. Glory days, glory days. Pour enough, drink it up. Great pursuit of the reason. Oh, glory days, glory days. Your tangled mood, fend off your brood, your hues of doom, fend off your tune, weep at the moon, your private tune, unicommune. She speaks to you. I feel you do. I feel you do. Falling in blue. Here lies your form. Midlife divide. Blend in, recede into the walls, aglow like a welcome sign. Chandelier, char gas infused, your magic brews. She speaks to you, you need her too. I feel you do, I feel you do, falling in blue, falling in blue. Heart is a funny fit. Why not try it on? Why not try it on? Why not try it on? Why not?
Nailed it. Nailed it.
Visit the Shuffle page at WNMU-FM.org for more information on how to be featured on the program.